Hello and welcome to the History of Bangalore. I am Ramjee Chandran with episode 27 and part 4 of my mini-series on the Rashtrakutas and the Gangas. In the last episode, I looked at the rise and the domination of Rashtrakuta King Govinda III and all his troubles with the irrepressible Shivamara II of the Gangas, whom he simply could not control. In this episode, I will look into the reign of Amoghavarsha Nrupathunga. It's a tale of a troubled ruler who spent almost his entire reign of 64 years, which started when he was 6 years old, fighting off enemies from within and the outside. And I will dive into how any king could possibly cope with this kind of life, and how Amoghavarsha found his peace through his love of literature and becoming deeply spiritual. But before I do that, allow me a moment to thank the Prestige Group, my sponsors, for their support in making this podcast happen. Building cities one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. When Govinda III died in 1814 AD, he had left a huge legacy. He was one of the most recognized kings in history. His fame was spoken of internationally, tales carried by travelers to India. An Arab traveler, Sulaiman al-Thajir, in his book Akhbar as-Sin wal-Hind, which means reports from China and India, wrote of Govinda III as being one of the 4 greatest rulers of the world. A passage from that book translates to this: the Indians and the Chinese are in agreement that the number of the great kings in the world is 4. The first of these 4 they count as the king of the Arabs. Then the king of China counts himself as the next king after the Arabs. And then the king of Arum, and then Balahara, the king of the people whose ears are perforated. Arum was the Byzantine Empire, which Arabs still refer to as Roman or Arum, the word for Rome. And Balahara refers to Govinda III. Maybe that's all they heard from the title Prithvi Vallabharaja, or a variant of that. The ear-piercing reference is clearly noteworthy for the scholars. They must have been amazed at the jewelry that the Indian kings wore at the time. Al-Thajir had this to say about Govinda: as for this Balahara, verily, he is the noblest among the Indians, and they acknowledge his nobility. When Govinda died, his heir apparent was only 6 years old. History knows of this king as Amoghavarsha Nrupathunga. It's unclear what his real name was. Some theories that it may have been Sharva, but the hard evidence on that is, well, soft. Before he died, Govinda, in the interest of continuity, decided to appoint a regent for the underage king. As history has taught us time and again, a regent is someone who acts as king in all matters, and therefore he would be someone trusted not to usurp the throne. And Govinda knew just the person: Karka Patalamalla, his nephew. Karka was the son of Govinda's brother Indra from the Gujarat branch of the family, and he had stood loyally by his side during the revolt of Stamba. Once Govinda had seen to the succession, and believing that his kingdom and the future of his son were in safe hands, Govinda said, "My fame has spread across the 3 worlds, and my exceptional son is capable of bearing the burden of this realm. What remains for me to accomplish in this world?" The Sanjan inscription takes this to its conclusion. He followed his fame while going to the lofty place, namely heaven. Govinda's concerns were prophetic. Whenever a powerful ruler dies, there is a vacuum. For one thing, no great empire was ever built without making lasting enemies, and there were 2 immediate enemies who were still hurting from the battles with Govinda. One was the Gangas, several of whom had been recently put to death as a part of Govinda's invasion of the south. The indomitable Gangas had never accepted the Rashtrakutas as their new overlords, and had resisted them at every turn, and this didn't make for a good relationship with the Rashtrakutas. Things did not improve even when there were overtures of friendship, such as when Govinda had released Shivamara II and even went to the extent of participating in his coronation along with Pallava Nandivarman III. Now, it would seem that the Gangas might have been happy to continue with things as they existed with the Chalukyas, not overlord and vassal, but more like allies and equals, but with an acknowledged seniority. The other enemy was the Vengi Chalukyas. Now, you might remember that Govinda had inflicted the worst humiliation on Vijayaditya by making him get down on the floor and clean his tables. Such things are not easily forgotten. As long as Govinda was alive, there was really nothing anyone could do to challenge him. But after he died, the situation was ripe for retribution. On top of it, the successor was a 6-year-old boy, and as historian Altekar put it, the presence of the boy emperor on the throne must have aroused imperial ambitions in several hearts. And the Vengi Chalukyas caused trouble, and they attacked the Rashtrakutas. Now note that none of them had banded together as friends. The situation resembled a free-for-all, if anything. And in the wake of a committed, driven and ruthless conqueror like Govinda, it was almost comical the way things played out. First, the royal family itself started to fragment into factions, and they started disputes. Ministers and palace officials turned disloyal. Finally, no one at home could be trusted, and no one person could trust the other. It was every man for himself. And then Shivamara II of the Gangas saw fit to declare independence, and then to drive the point home, he started harboring all the family rebels in his kingdom. And then when Vijayaditya of the Vengis attacked the Rashtrakutas, various feudatories, possibly unhappy that Govinda had made Karka the regent, jumped into the fray, and they started killing all the imperial officers who stood in their way. A very confusing bloodbath ensued. And then many of the feudatories started to assert their own independence, following Shivamara's example. Now, we cannot tell from the records who these rebels were and who did what to whom exactly, but their common objective was achieved, and Amoghavarsha was deposed. But here's the comical part. Having deposed Amoghavarsha, whatever faction or factions there were that were successful in doing this had no idea what to do thereafter. And then the rebels started fighting among themselves. The only thing that ruled Manyaketa at the time was confusion and chaos. But Govinda's choice of regent had proved wise. Karka was able to bring everything back in control. But it took years and a deadly toll. The inscriptions say that the war was a prolonged and bloody affair, but the credit must go to Karka for bringing things back, because Amoghavarsha was yet a pre-teen boy. Now, when did all this happen? Placing these events in a timeline was partially done by elimination. The Navasari plates, which were issued in 816 AD, don't mention the civil war, but the Surat plates issued in 821 mention the restoration of the crown to Amoghavarsha. So this entire conflict must have occurred between 816 and 821, and Karka must have deftly handled the conflicting and conflicted parties to his advantage, and he brought the young Amoghavarsha, his cousin, to the throne. Considering that Amoghavarsha was only 6 years old in 814, the rebellion or civil war would have occurred between 816 and 821. And Amoghavarsha must have turned 13 when he was restored. Now, kings have been known to take over the kingdom at 13, possibly a young man's coming of age. But becoming an emperor and earning titles like Nrupathunga wasn't just about birthright and chronology. Now, the handing over from regent to emperor would depend on the decision of the regent and also of the palace councillors, who would base their assessment on how mature and ready for responsibility the young king would have been to take on such an important position. Now we know from records that date back to the 6th century that princes of the Deccan received training not only in warfare and physical fitness and the education like literature and science and math, but even in matters of business, critical thinking, decision-making and strategy, which fall under the umbrella of epistemology. The people of the country and senior council would have to make sure that a young prince was well trained before he could take over the kingdom. But think about it. In Amoghavarsha's case, all this training would have been conducted under the cloud of his exile, every day hearing of people battling for his throne. What happens to a 6-year-old boy who was crowned as king only to be told that he must now run and hide in fear for his life? How much of this would a 6-year-old understand? And then, in those crucial, formative years, as he grew into a young adult, watching and waiting while this civil war tore apart his kingdom, a kingdom that he knew was his, what sort of man did that make Amoghavarsha? Did he grow up feeling bitter and vengeful, cowardly and fearful, or a man wise and mature beyond his years? When I come back, let's look into the life of Amoghavarsha Nrupathunga as the emperor of the Rashtrakutas right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. Radar approved.
Hello again. We are somewhere around 821 AD, and Amoghavarsha, just into his teens, is on the throne. To the question I raised before the break, what manner of man did the trauma of his growing years make him? The answer is that the events of history show that he became a perfect blend of strength and pragmatism. Of all the rulers of the Deccan, it is fair to say that no one fit the saying, "Speak softly and carry a big stick," better than Amoghavarsha. He became a fearsome warrior, unafraid to emulate the battle-ready nature of his father, and a competent diplomat who understood that lasting peace is sometimes even more powerful than victory at war. And in the midst of constant trouble and threat, he found it within him to reach out and make the peace with his rivals. While so, it cannot be said that Amoghavarsha even had one moment of peace during his long reign of 64 years. And even after he came back to the throne through the efforts of Karka, Amoghavarsha faced a constant stream of threats on his own. Now, in this atmosphere of alarm, it was completely understandable that he and his cohort would have been aware that the first thing that they needed to do was to show strength. And here is how that happened. In my previous episode, I spoke about the 108 battles that the Vengi Chalukyas fought against the Rashtrakutas over a period of 12 years. Now, these 108 battles had started during the time of Govinda III, and they ended where we are presently during the reign of Amoghavarsha. The determination with which Vengi Chalukya Vijayaditya II had fought was admirable, and indeed, Vengi records claim victory in all 108 battles because it is said that Vijayaditya built 108 temples to commemorate each battle. Now, he wouldn't have done this if he hadn't got some success, at least, in every one of those battles. But still, moving on. After many years and presumably many battles between them, Amoghavarsha finally defeated Vijayaditya. And the result was an inscription that suggested that Vijayaditya now worshipped at the feet of Amoghavarsha. Now, during this long reign of Amoghavarsha, there were changes in the rulership of all the other empires. By 850 AD, the Vengi kingdom had changed rulers, and it was now ruled by Vijayaditya III, the grandson of Vijayaditya II, and the young man was a pragmatic ruler. Now, he too had tried to rid the kingdom of the Rashtrakutas and the Gangas, and in 850 AD, he fought a battle with Amoghavarsha. The two armies met on the battlefield of Vingavalli, which is near present-day Kambam in Andhra. Vijayaditya lost the battle. But soon after that, he decided to become loyal to Amoghavarsha and remained that way right until Amoghavarsha's departure from the scene. And at that point, he declared independence from the Rashtrakutas and achieved the lifelong goal of the Vengi Chalukyas. But during his period of submission to Amoghavarsha, he participated in Rashtrakuta attacks against the Gangavadi, and I will cycle back to that part of our history. Now, various inscriptions record the victories of Amoghavarsha over the Vengis in different ways. The Begumra plates described it as Amoghavarsha having raised the kingdom of the Rattas, which is another word for Rashtrakutas, from the ocean of the Chalukyas where it had been submerged, and this had given Amoghavarsha the title Veera Narayana. The Sanjan plates speak of the Vengi being consumed by the fierce fire of whose anger the enemies were reduced to ashes. And once these battles were over and done, Amoghavarsha could believe himself to be ultimately victorious and materially undisputed. The inscriptions say that he made a feast of the Chalukyas and the Abhyushakas, which I think is a collective noun for rebels, to Yama, the god of death. This was done right on the battlefield of Vingavalli. Now, some think that that was literally a feast that he got people to come and eat, but some other historians believe that it's just a metaphorical feast of handing over his enemies to the god of death. And in later years, the Sanjan inscription records that in a ceremony, Amoghavarsha cut off the finger from his left hand and offered it to the goddess Mahalakshmi of Kolhapur for, I quote, the pacification of a calamity to the whole people. Now, records indicate that there was a terrible famine in the land, probably during the time of all this conflict, and this was Amoghavarsha's votive offering to alleviate the problems of his people. By all available evidence and cross-verification, this story is very likely the truth. Now, despite Amoghavarsha feeling that he had arrived at a point where he was victorious, his reign was still far from peaceful. In the 64 years that he ruled, there had been a succession of kings in both the king. Now, while Amoghavarsha may have taken a breath and believed that his campaigns were successful and he could have a moment of peace, the truth is that his reign was far from peaceful. Now, back in the Gangavadi, Shivamara II again. He had remained loyal to Amoghavarsha for about a year, but got itchy again. And then he joined one of the many revolts against Amoghavarsha, and he was ingloriously defeated by a local Rashtrakuta officer, and he died fighting at Kagemogyur near Tumkur. The throne passed through his nephew Rachamalla to the current ruler Hereya, who was also known as Nitimarga. And soon Nitimarga turned in revolt after gathering support from a lot of other disgruntled feudatories. Amoghavarsha was a tired man by then. He entrusted the job of quelling this rebellion to his general Bankesa, who not only managed to suppress them successfully, but also conducted campaigns where he crossed the Kaveri and pressed way further south. But even before he had been able to finish the job, there was trouble at home, and Amoghavarsha recalled Bankesa to the capital. Fresh disturbance had broken out, and this was from none other than the crown prince Krishna, his own son, and the ruler of Lata, Dhruva I, who was the son of Karka, the very Karka who had earlier protected Amoghavarsha so capably. Bankesa clashed with Dhruva in battle and killed him, but the struggle didn't end there. The conflict continued with Dhruva's son, Akkalavarsha, and his grandson, Dhruva II. But suddenly, Dhruva II was attacked from the rear flank by the Gurjara Pratihara ruler, Mihira Bhoja, or Raja Bhoja as he was known popularly, and when some of his own kin started to turn against him, Dhruva II wisely made the peace with Amoghavarsha. Now, this was around the year 860 AD. Now, with Bankesa occupied in this attempted palace coup by his own son and his cousins from Gujarat, Amoghavarsha turned to his new ally and friend, Gunaga Vijayaditya of the Vengis, and asked him if he would handle the continuing problem with the Gangas, and now the Gangas had been joined in the revolt by Nolamba ruler Nolambadi Raja, aka Mangi. Vijayaditya III readily agreed. He took his forces and his armies and marched into the Gangavadi and quelled the rebellion, and for good measure cut off Mangi's head. Now with the Ganga forces defeated, the fearsome Nitimarga was forced to negotiate a peace. For all these successful battles, Amoghavarsha at heart was a peaceful man. Now if we step back, we will see that almost every single military engagement of Amoghavarsha's, right from when he was a teenage boy, was in defense. Unlike Govinda III, he did not try to expand his kingdom, and he did not initiate any kind of military action upon another kingdom. It is hard to find another king like Amoghavarsha, who had to spend his entire childhood watching his kingdom burn in civil war, and then spend almost every year of his reign of 64 years fighting against friend, against foe, against family. Maybe because of this unusually traumatic life, Amoghavarsha found his peace in two pursuits. He became deeply religious and deeply literary. And as soon as he had the chance and the tide of attacks on him had ebbed, he decided to end the war with the Gangas, and instead of trying to subjugate them, gave his daughter, the beautiful Chandraballabe, in marriage to the Ganga prince Butuga, and another daughter Sanka to the Pallava king Nandivarman III. And by this, Amoghavarsha had made the peace and gained as in-laws two of the most fearsome empires of South India. Amoghavarsha's fame as a scholar has lived through the centuries. He wrote the very first literary work in Kannada known to exist today. It's called the Kavirajamarga, and it's a treatise on poetics. He is also credited with having authored the Sanskrit work Prashanotara Ratnamala. And in reading these works, it becomes apparent that while Amoghavarsha approached his Sanskrit scholarship with a deep intellectual curiosity, he approached the Kannada language from his heart. He was admired by several notable scholars of his time. Some of the names mentioned include Mahabhira, Veerasena, Jinasena, and Gunabhadra. Amoghavarsha also became a deeply religious, a deeply spiritual man, and he was viscerally attracted to the teachings of Mahabhira and to his own guru, Jinasena. It was from his Sanskrit work that the world learned that Amoghavarsha, having given himself to arts and spirituality, abdicated the throne. He had realized the futility of life and materialism and decided to move it to a higher plane. And somewhere around 878 AD, his son Krishna II took over the throne. Amoghavarsha Nrupathunga, having weathered the nightmare of a reign, had, through war and diplomacy, created an island of peace for his family and his kingdom. And by the end of that century, first through spirituality and literature, and now in death, Amoghavarsha found the peace that had eluded him all his life. In the next episode, I move towards the final days of the great kingdoms of the Gangas, the Rashtrakutas, and the resurgence of the Western Chalukyas. And then history starts to change. All that excitement is coming up very soon. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.